Hello and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today we're going to be talking about home labs, or as the title says, home lab. Should I even bother? Kind of a
I
divisive
mean,
statement there,
I
especially
don't
for
really
the
want to
business.
spoil it, so I'll try to be quiet at this stage.
Um, yeah, so I think the first thing when we talk about home labs, right, is home labs often mean gear. Gear means money,
Yeah.
and so that's probably the first question: is like, should I do that? Um, and so before you decide to do that, maybe you should ask, what am I going to use it for? So Nate, what do you use your home lab for?
My gosh, I have had some iteration of like machine in the basement since high school. Right? We're talking decades. So I have used my home lab for everything from running a BBS in the 90s to learning stuff so that I could get a career started to hosting home services. We'll touch on this a little more later, but there's a point where I got way too deep into the home lab stuff and too dependent on it, and it got to be a little. Well, it led to some burnout, to be honest. Right, so we'll talk about that some more. But yeah, I mean the today my home lab is a mix of hey, I really want to poke around at this new product, or hey, I want to build a demo for Into the Terminal, or other things for the day job, or I just heard about this cool tech that I want to poke around with. And it also does stuff like my home automation and my home media server and a few other things like game servers and whatever. So there is a balance. You got to be careful of that. And again, we'll touch on that a little more deeply in a bit.
Yeah, and I actually went kind of the other direction, and I started off with home labbing and ran my own network at home, and we did a lot of game nights and other stuff. Um, and then I was getting interrupted with things like power outages, and so when nothing works because your power was out, and then it requires a very specific rebooting of equipment or whatever, that
Hmm.
caused problems. So I ended up moving into Colo world and was hosting all of my stuff on a Colo. And this is before the cloud was really prevalent. But as a result, like that's what I do now is I use cloud services instead of home labbing. Um, so also involves some budget, but I think it's budget in a different way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
absolutely. My home lab is physical, like on premises, and always has been, right? Um, but you could absolutely do this on a cloud provider or a colo. I mean that might be the best of both worlds, right? You get, a colo, you get physical hardware, or could get physical hardware, whereas a cloud provider, you're paying like per second, right?
yeah, well, but cloud providers have sliding scales for costs, right? And there's a lot of cool projects you can do that fit in the free tier for cloud
Yeah,
providers. Um, but the flip side to like owning your own equipment is that you also have to maintain your own equipment. So
yeah,
if the memory module goes bad on your thing that's out in a colo, then you have to figure out how to fix that. And colos often have like an in-person like a human that will go and touch your box if you request it. We have to do things like order memory and ship it out there and then schedule a downtime for them to go do the thing and hope that it's doing all right, because otherwise you'll have to remote fix it.
right.
Um, so anyway, uh, Nate, you for like in-home home lab, what would you recommend to start off with?
So honestly, all you need to get started is either a decently beefy desktop machine that you also can run virtual machines on, right? Like that's the bare minimum. All you need to be able to do is run virtual machines. But if you want to disconnect that from the workstation you're working on, then either you just need an old desktop that you're not, the one you just moved out of, that you can put something on to run virtualization. Personally, I like RHEL with libvirt, but you could do, I don't know, does VMware still do ESXi type free home licensing? I don't know if they do that anymore. They used to. That was a good option for a long time. There's also Microsoft Windows with Hyper-V. right? Again, I think you can still do that for, well, free-ish. It's included with Windows. So if you have a Windows license, you can do it. But there's other ways to get that done. You could also just run like VirtualBox or something like Scott does for some of his demos.
Yeah, and I will like caution you about VirtualBox after we hear from our sponsor, but um, you know, RHEL is a great single hypervisor, right, with cockpit machines to manage it. If you need something, you're trying to do more hypervisors and tie them together, there's other community solutions like Proxmox that let you do those
Totally
things.
forgot about Prox. Sorry about that.
Yep. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is like you could start small. And Nate and I were talking before the show about how Homelab tends to grow organically. Like
Yeah.
you start off with that one box, and then it's like, oh man, this is on the same network as my phones and iPads and children's computers and whatever else. It'd be really cool if I have my own network. So you put it onto a network, and then all of a sudden it's like, man, DNS would be great.
Yeah.
And so like it just kind of snowballs from there as you continue to run across like small things that are kind of annoying that you end up adding another service to fix. Nate was telling me before the show he's starting with exploring with a different monitoring solution now.
Yeah, it's one of the things we'll talk about in a bit. And on the topic of network isolation, the I guess the security person in me kind of leans toward this, but I would highly recommend that if you're serious about running a home lab, and this may depend on what you intend to do with the home lab, but I would highly consider building in some network isolation from the get-go. Like, just get yourself some prosumer grade network gear, whether that's something like Ubiquity, which is what I run at home, or it could be what was that open source project? PFSense, is that the one I'm thinking of? You can
Oh
actually buy
yeah.
hardware that runs it. OpenSense, maybe OpenSense is it. That'll do VLAN tagging, right? Um, just put your lab machines in their own isolated network. So if something does go haywire or whatever, it's it's roped off in its own little section that's not going to cause you headaches on your home lab on your home network. Now, actually never had an issue with that, but it sure does make me feel good to know that I have it isolated. Now, I've gone a lot further with the network isolation because I have IoT devices and I have, my kids who are on a network that I filter for content. So you definitely get a lot more leverage and a lot more versatility, I guess, if you build that in from the start. You don't have to try to rework stuff later. So get the basics in to begin with. You'll thank yourself later.
Yeah. So we're going to do some demos after we hear from our sponsor, who today is Nate's Subterranean Hosting. Are you tired of hosting solutions that don't fit your needs? Do you ever find yourself saying, wow, I wish my hosting solution I wish my hosting solution was lower effort. Well, look no further than Nate's Subterranean Hosting Solutions. That's right, Nate's Subterranean Hosting, conveniently located just feet or meters for
I
you
guess it
other
depends on
people
your
in the world
location.
from Nate's off-road and metal fabrication services. At Nate's Subterranean Hosting, we'll give you the best effort hosting solutions, guaranteeing 5 nines of updates of uptime if we can manage it.
Maybe it's 9 5s of uptime.
that could be great. Remember, you might call it a basement, but we call it subterranean. I thought that was an appropriate sponsor, so I reached out and got a repeat sponsor this week for
that's good. That guy, he's hard to work with sometimes, but
it's because he lets his dogs press the monitoring buttons and whatnot.
Who else would you like to do it? Would you want me to send my kids down there? Come on. Probably less reliable than the dog.
So we're talking about home labbing stuff. One of the things that I found early in home labbing was I didn't want to spend a lot of my time redoing things I had done in the past. And so, for example, I was working with some media server stuff, and I could have run my media server on Fedora. but every 6 months there's a new Fedora, and sometimes it evolves pretty rapidly. And that media server software doesn't always evolve at the same speed. So I went with Red Hat Enterprise Linux for that project because I knew that I could kind of set it up and essentially be okay for a number of years, because RHEL and the media software kind of evolved at the same rate, or at least I could pin to one or the other version of it and kind of keep it going without a lot of effort. So to that end, there are several options for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I think for most home labbers, probably the right solution is the Red Hat Developer for Individuals subscription, which includes 16 RHEL system entitlements, plus some additional things like HA and extended update support, so you can actually pin yourself to a minor release and still get security updates. And you can use it for development, test, QE, or production if it's for individual use. So that one is, I think, pretty right on from like the business rules and the sizing and what comes with it. It also includes things like Ansible stuff. So there's like a lot of things in the developer for individual subscription that will get you pretty far in home labbing and learning new technologies and trying out new things. Yeah, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
Well, just that I've used the developer sub in my home lab since before I joined Red Hat, and it's great, right? I mean, you get to work on like the actual thing you may see in the enterprise instead of something that's very similar to it, right? And it's really helpful. Now, I had a ton of RHEL experience before the dev sub even existed, right? But I could imagine it would be a lot easier to learn actual RHEL today if you were starting in the industry, if you had an actual RHEL sub, which of course you can now get for free, which is pretty cool. I think it's pretty great. And 16 of them, and you get access to Insight/Lightspeed, and I guess satellite's not included. Satellite's another thing that's good to learn, but you could always go to upstream for that, I suppose, if you really wanted to.
Yeah, and then before we had our sponsorship message, Nate mentioned VirtualBox, which I use a lot for demos on the show. But I don't like VirtualBox as a solution for home labbing. And here's why. Because when I home lab, I want to practice. Like that's one of the outcomes of home labbing is I'm going to like use this thing and it's going to provide me practice and it's dedicated. But what I found is when I use hypervisor solutions, I will like install a Linux system on top of my Mac or my Windows box or whatever. And I fire it up when I want to do something really specific, like build a demo for into the terminal. But otherwise, that system is turned off. And so
Mhm.
that like day to day interaction that I have with that box and that service is not there when I do virtual, virtual machines running on another system that I use often. So that's why I don't think virtual systems is a great solution for home labbing unless you're like setting them up to run services and other stuff where they'll be on all the time, where you can connect to them and do stuff.
Right. So that'd be the difference between the machine I run in my basement and the thing I might do on my laptop, right? If I'm running a VM on my laptop, it's probably not running all the time. That would be a silly misuse of my the resources on my machine for a VM to sit idle forever. But on my RHEL box in the basement, sure. Like I probably have demo systems I forgot are running that are sitting on there.
Well, but that box also runs a bunch of VMs for different
Yeah.
services and other things that
Right.
are either components of your existing home lab or things that you're providing to your house in terms of services.
Right. Right. So it's the machines get more. I think what you're leading to here is the machine in the case where you have it turned off all the time. It's going to be the next time you turn it on, it's going to be out of date. There could be cruft on there. Like every time you want to start up a demo, it's going to be, well, now I got to boot the thing up. Now I should probably install updates. Now, oh, the updates took 45 minutes, right, or whatever. Right now I got to reboot the thing, right. Whereas a machine that's up all the time, you could have it. It gets a little more love because it's up and running. Or honestly, in my case, I have things set up so I can deploy a new VM pretty quickly. right? And that's usually what I do for a demo. I'll spin up a brand new VM using some scripting and some automation, and then it comes up pretty much ready to go instead of having to, dust off the machine that I used 6 months ago.
Well, and I think that's the other thing is a lot of people use home labbing or get into home labbing to build skills.
Hmm.
And if you're not doing it often, you're not building skills, right? So if that box has
Right.
been turned off for 6 months and you've not touched it, what skills have you built by working with that box? Zero in the last 6 months because it's been turned off.
Right. And that's actually a really good segue into kind of like the next topic we had, unless you wanted to touch on your cloud-based labs first.
Oh,
But
yeah. So I mentioned that I had kind of moved to Colo, and then over time I actually moved to cloud, mostly because a lot of the services I was offering on my Colo, things like photo sharing and like there are now cloud services that do all that stuff.
right.
But a lot of times I'll want to fire something up or run a game server for the weekend for something that I'm doing. And so that's where cloud is like really handy, where I don't have to carry the hypervisor and other technology stack in the house that I have to maintain and update and manage. Um, and I also don't have to worry about internet outages or power outages because like the cloud provider takes care of all that. So I've shifted most of my home labbing all to the cloud. Um, because I could just like start it up and I can run it and I can turn it down or turn it off. Don't forget to turn it off when you're doing cloud stuff.
That's the key.
Yeah. Um, but that way, like a lot of the infrastructure that you need for home labbing, I don't need, right? I don't need a storage array. I don't need UPSs and things to like keep my stuff going because the cloud provider provides all that.
Right. Now, on the flip side of that is you don't get exposure to all those pieces, though. You don't have to worry
Also,
about a storage array because maybe that's a skill you don't care about learning, or it's a skill you've already got and you don't care about honing because you just don't use it from day to day anymore. Whereas someone who's in the industry doing this day to day, they may want to have to be exposed to that in their home lab so that they have to think about incorporating that when they're testing something, right? And that kind of leads to the next thing, which is what do you do with your home lab? And there's a number of things you could do with a home lab. Some of those are very, I want to learn a thing, so I turn it on, I do the thing, and then I turn it off. But then what happens to the skill you learned? Right? It's not something that's in the forefront. It's something you did successfully once and then you turned it off and you haven't touched it. I suggest that when you do something in your home lab, you pick something that you actually want to leverage, something you want to do, right? A good example is like a game server or file sharing for you and your family, right? Something that isn't high stakes, right? Like the family's not going to starve to death if the thing goes down, or the lights in your house will still work if your home automation is is one of the things, right? The internet doesn't go down if your project dies, right? But it's still something that you're going to have to at least pay attention to. Make sure it's up to date. Make sure that it keeps running, and possibly have people who at least a little bit depend on it, right? Again, there's a balance there.
Yeah, nobody wants to live in my house with no internet. That's 100% a true statement.
Agreed. Agreed. Believe me, I know the moment the internet is out, there'll be someone
Yeah.
knocking at the door.
So there's a bunch of chat.
I
About
see.
all
It's just
that,
flowing today. It's lots of
Yeah.
conversations.
So M4600 M5C says that he runs HAKVM with iSCSI storage on an isolated network using OVS, and inside of that network, they've simulated an enterprise network, and they're using KEA, which is a DHCP implementation, free
Yeah.
IPA, which we have in RHEL as identity manager,
Yep.
NFS, and other services. Yeah, like that's kind of the trifecta right there. He also says that he runs KVM and virtualizes everything. I think KVM is great.
Yeah.
Somebody else is asking about single node OpenShift. So you could do single node OpenShift, but
Yeah.
realize that at that point, instead of like running VMs to do stuff, you're probably thinking about how to containerize stuff and run everything as a container or an operator. So your architecture is a little bit different in the lab there.
I've had in the back of my brain like a loose plan to build a single node OpenShift in my home lab. I tried to go through it once and kind of lost focus and never really got it done because I do a lot of containers in my home lab. My home lab hypervisor is not just a hypervisor; it's also a container host. I do both on the same box, and I would really love to be able to throw all the containers onto an OpenShift thing. Mainly because I want to learn OpenShift a little more, but also because I feel like it would give me a little better of a management plane, right, to manage those containers. So, but yeah, definitely viable, right? Single node OpenShift is a thing. It used to be that you had to have like a grant from the government to run an OpenShift cluster because it was just there was a lot of resources because it was meant for enterprise, right? It was not a very home labable thing, but single node OpenShift has really changed that.
Yeah. And Shantanu says that he uses home labs to try out different file system things and experiment
Yeah.
with different file systems and see how they function. I actually do that with my cloud systems. I also do it with my cloud systems because they're ephemeral, which means that I can just like throw them away when I break it in some horrible and mysterious,
Man,
unfixable
I
way.
totally messed up the file system on this. Oh well.
Yep, exactly. Make another one.
Turn it off.
So
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's also valid, right? If there's expense here. I don't care if you're using an old desktop or whether you're using a cloud provider or whatever. There is some expense. Um, if you if you can't stomach any of that, and you really just want machines to go and try out a feature or something, I can't say this is general purpose and you should use this for anything and everything, but we have public labs, right? Which you can get a console on a RHEL machine and you can do pretty much whatever you can do on a RHEL machine on those machines. And we use those a lot for the demos we do on Into the Terminal, right? So it'll look very familiar if you're used to Into the Terminal and the demos we do. You'll recognize the consoles on our public lab environment if you fire one up. In fact, there you go.
actually,
Scott's got one running.
we've recently changed our backend provider for a lot of them, and so they do look a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. You've probably noticed kind of like a purpley blue background, and now it's black.
Yeah. As it should be.
And yeah, the other thing is this is what I noticed down here at the bottom, right? It says, "Hey, you got about 60 minutes," but look at the timeout at the top, Nate.
That's a heck of a timeout you got there, Scott.
Yeah,
3,000 minutes.
looks like I need to go and talk to some people about maybe we should turn that back down.
Yeah,
But
so folks, if you want free access, do it quick.
well, you can have free access, but they're ephemeral boxes, and
if you want 3,000
and
hours of it or minutes of it.
minutes, yes. They also don't like you don't hibernate them in safe state, like they are ephemeral. So
Yeah,
when
they
you
go
just
away.
want to like try something out, you can't remember a command, you want to mess around with the box and not really care if you break it, like this is a great place to do those things. This is the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Open Lab.
Right. So we've talked a lot. We haven't done a lot of demo today, Scott. I almost feel bad about that.
I showed a terminal.
You showed a terminal right there. So I have both whiteboard and my home lab ready to like kind of show people around. Do we want to do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Let me switch my screen share over to my home lab. You guys have seen my home lab before on Into the Terminal. All right, we can turn that guy on now. Here we go. Okay, so I don't think there's any good screen layout. That makes it smaller, but at least we're not blocking the screen. So this is my home lab. You can see it's a RHEL 9.6 machine. I haven't had the time to take it down and move it to RHEL 10 yet because there are things on here that my household depends on. And that's one of those topics that we kind of touched on, right? Be careful. Be very careful. I used to have a very extensive home lab where I had a Linux-based firewall that did all of my routing and network access and internet access, and I had like Nextcloud running in my home lab, and I had like file sharing, and I had email. Email was running out of my home, right? These were a lot of services that not just me, right? My wife's email ran through that same mail server, right? So that meant it had to work. I was her spam filter. I was like whatever she couldn't find in email, she had to come to me. Uh, Now I've scaled that back quite a bit. I was still working as a sysadmin at the time, and I tell you, I just got burned out, right? Because I would sysadmin all day at work, and then if I got through a whole day without any phone calls about the internet being down or whatever, when I got home, they were a lot of times waiting for me, and then I'd have to troubleshoot that when I got home. So this is past Nate telling maybe future you that be careful how much you depend on your home lab, because if you work day to day as a systems administrator and then you come home and you have to work as a systems administrator, and at home you don't have the enterprise support agreements that your office may have, right? It's a lot of stress. So I don't want to hammer that too hard, but just keep in mind, if too much depends on you, then it gets to be a job. And at home, you should be able to relax, right? So I'm careful about the things I run in my home lab now. I also have a colo like Scott was talking about. So like anything that's publicly accessible goes on the colo. I don't put any of that in my home anymore because I just decided that was a little bit too much of a risk. Okay, so this is a RHEL 9.6 machine running libvirt and KVM, and it has the web console running on top of it. I've showed you guys this plenty of times. But the cool thing about this is this virtual machines plugin for web console, which gives you a very nice web UI that gives you access to all of your virtual machines. And you can tell I have a lot. A lot of these are things from old demos that I just never cleaned up. There's only maybe a half a dozen that are actually running, and some of those are things that I was actively working on. Some of them are actual infrastructure for the household, right? But I also told you about Podman. I have containers running on this same host. There's also a plugin for Web Console that will run containers, will let you manage containers from within Web Console. So this is all a nice. I do most of this command line except for the virtual stuff, the virtualization stuff. I do almost exclusively through Web Console at this point. Most of my container stuff I do by logging into the machine and doing it via the command line. But it's nice to have this, right? If you just need to quick log in and check on stuff. The other thing I wanted to talk about, though, was networking. And you're going to see when I click on this networking tab, I also do most of my network config through here. There's a lot going on in here, right? Like a lot. I have a bunch of IP addresses associated with this particular interface. Each of these interfaces, this bridge 10 IoT, bridge 2 services, bridge 20 lab, these are all VLANs that are then, the VLANs are tagged by my network gear, right? And then those are handed off via a trunk, right? So now we're getting a little bit more advanced here via a trunk to my hypervisor. And the hypervisor tags them out and passes those bridges off to my VMs. So I can put a VM in any one of my VLANs if I wanted to. Like if I, like my home automation stuff can run inside of the IoT bridge because that's where I put all of my devices, right? So, but yeah, this is, I don't want to say I recommend that everybody goes this deep to begin with. And all these alternate IP addresses, by the way, are for Podman containers. I have them mapped to specific IP addresses so that you can get to each service separately. I don't necessarily recommend that everyone goes this deep to begin with, but like I said at the beginning, the basics, getting VLAN tagging set up in the beginning, getting that trunk set up in the beginning, getting the isolation at least thought about and the stubs of it all laid out in the beginning will help you later if you decide, boy, I really wish these smart light bulbs that I just deployed had their own network to live in so that they are isolated from everything and don't have access to the internet, right? Well, I can do that because I have a separate network for just them. Where if you don't, if they're all on the same network as your phones and your laptops and your television and all of your home lab stuff, it gets a lot muddier a lot quicker.
Well, and also I can tell you from experience, when you get to the point where you're like, I really need to VLAN tag things, You start that process, and then you figure out all of the things that it breaks as it's breaking them. Because
Yes.
there's some IP address put in some config file somewhere on a TV or like something,
Yep.
and
Yep.
yeah, you get to track down all those.
When I first laid this out, I felt like I was working with a team of engineers, right, to come up with a layout for how I wanted all this to work. Luckily, I had the experience from working in the industry. I used to carpool with our network engineer, right? So he and I had a ton of conversations. So I have a bunch of networking background as well as systems administration background, even though I've never done network administration as like my primary day job. So, I sort of had the skill set to do this. This is stuff that you may have to learn if you're working on deploying your first home lab, right? And but there's lots of people out there that can help you learn it, right? Lots of YouTube channels that focus on networking, so I would recommend kind of starting with those. All right, do we have any other questions we want to run through? Because I was gonna try, we could like whiteboard out some of what I did with my home lab if people are interested in that.
So actually, the chat is talking about people's different home lab solutions. So
Okay.
Bao 40 says he uses a ThinkStation, an older ThinkStation, which I think is a nice solution. It's a tower. You can slam a bunch of drives in it if you would need more storage. And it's what the technical account managers at Red Hat often order as like their secondary, more capable than a laptop machine.
Yeah,
Um,
I had a Dell Precision workstation from when I worked at my last job that when I had used it. I swear the thing was 7 years old when they finally got me a new machine. And then afterward, they're like, "We don't want that machine." So I took it home, and that became a new iteration of my home lab because the thing was really beefy. It had like 16 cores and a lot of memory, and I think I packed some more memory in it and some more storage, and that became a hypervisor in my home lab for a long time.
yeah. Somebody else mentioned that they went to an electronics recycler and got ISA version 3 capable CPUs and was able to, because they're older equipment, were able to get it relatively inexpensively. That's good. That may end up limiting your distro use over time, especially for
Hmm.
things like RHEL. We tend to cut off support in newer versions for older hardware. But others like, and that would also affect CentOS Stream because that's kind of the precursor of RHEL. But like Fedora has really great long-term support for hardware. Somebody else was talking about using a laptop. They have a beefy
Yeah.
laptop, and I mentioned that my first home lab equipment was actually a laptop, like a surplus laptop that I had gotten from work, because it had its own built-in UPS right in its
Yeah.
battery,
Yeah.
so I could survive power blips.
I didn't mention that when I was going over my home lab, but I also have I had gotten a hold of a used UPS. I had to replace the batteries in it, which was not as expensive as you might think, but it's actually a smart UPS 1400, which does a great job for the handful of machines that I have running. I basically have one machine and a Synology NAS that it has to power, and like my cable modem and the network gear, which don't draw as much power as you might think.
Yeah, and Shantanu said being friends with the IT department in a company
Oh
helps them
heck
out
yeah,
for things like RAM. The other thing I used to do is when there was an electronics recycling drive at like my multi-tenant office building, I would like look through the bins because a lot of times there were like RAM sticks and like other things that I could use to beef up my gear that was just gonna, kind of get chucked aside. Um,
I made friends with our data center guy when I was at my last job, and when I because I would know when a server was going to go and get decommissioned because I was the guy that was running the server, right? But he was the one that was responsible with getting it unracked and getting it off to our recycler, right, and wiping the drives and stuff. So if I knew a machine that I thought was going to be useful in my home lab was coming up, or I really needed an upgrade, I'd be like, "Hey Pete, want to go to lunch?" And then we would talk it through, and he'd be like, "Yeah, okay, we'll get that one to you instead of the recycler." And then that's how I would get my new home lab stuff. It's not quite as easy
yeah,
now that I don't work in an actual data center.
well, and Red Hat actually had the policy that we couldn't give equipment to employees. It had to go to the recycling facility.
Yeah.
But once it was at the recycling facility or the, where they're collecting the e-waste or whatever, once it had been placed there, Red Hat had thrown it away.
Right.
So at that point, it became like no one's property. And so if you knew when that was happening, you could like kind of mill around, and then they drop off the equipment. And then you could go in and like, like a squirrel, like root through it and look for the nuts that you wanted to take home.
I heard the acorn
Um,
fall. Go get it. Go
right.
get it.
Uh, Mundatazo asks, do you guys have a NAS in your home lab?
I do. I do. I have a Synology that, my gosh, it's probably 4 or 5 years old now. I've actually been in the back of my head thinking about when might it be time to replace it, because it's I don't know what the lifespan is on a Synology, but yes, I have one. It does Samba, it does NFS, and I even have it serving iSCSI out to the hypervisor I was just showing around. So I get to, poke around with all of those when it's necessary.
And Shantanu recommends TrueNAS, which is a BSD based, or maybe it's now Linux based.
I don't remember anymore. I've heard a lot
Yeah.
about TrueNAS. I hear it's a good platform.
Well, so what I liked about an appliance like a Synology was it had a pretty nice UI for messing
Mhm.
around with stuff. And then it was optimized for things like drives. So if I had a bad drive, I could just pop out the drive sled, slam in a new drive, and be done. Whereas
Right.
TrueNAS runs off of like a server platform. So you have to take apart the server and replace stuff.
Right.
So servers are very modular now, so that maybe that's not as big of a deal these days. But
Well, it's not
once
just
upon a
that
time,
though. It's most NAS vendors will have some sort of smarts built in that, there's a UI option that says, I'm about to replace a drive. And then you pull out the drive, you pop in a new one, and it rebuilds the array for you.
Mhm.
Where I don't know how that works with TrueNAS. Maybe it's just as easy. But the last time I did this on a system, like a physical server, there was a little more. It was a little more involved, depending on how that array was set up. Was it a software array versus a hardware array? Software arrays, you'd have to like monkey around with the software that runs the array to make sure that it saw the new drive and that it didn't reject it. And it's also a lot fuzzier about drive sizes. The Synology is anyway, where if I want to upgrade my whole array, I can start swapping out drives one at a time with larger drives. And it'll just kind of make that all work, right? Where with if you're managing that yourself via a SCSI controller or via a software array, it's more complicated. I'm not saying it's impossible, and obviously you can do it. I've seen people do it, but it's just not as simple, right? And again, this is your home lab. You don't want it to be a second job.
Yeah. Yeah. And Nate, for like upgrading your Synology, for example, what I found was I needed to push more data for whatever reason. And so that was kind of the driving factor behind, is it time for an upgrade? Wasn't, is it broken and unfunctional, but more like
Right.
I needed more capability, which meant that it was time to upgrade the thing to like a 10 gig network backend or something like that.
Right.
Um,
And there are some follow-on benefits to having a storage array in your home. The first of which would be backups, right? How many of you are doing really good desktop backups? And if so, where are you storing them? Are you paying a cloud provider to keep those things? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a local copy, right? So I use my Synology. It's got a built-in backup utility that I'm using now, but you can just use it as a storage target, whether NFS or iSCSI or Samba, however you want to do it. And then you can replicate that to a cloud storage somewhere, right? So you've got your local copy, your local backup, and then your cloud backup, so that even if the Synology were to fail and your laptop were to fail, or like some power surge were to come in and smoke all the electronics in your house, you still have that backup on the cloud, right? So that's another useful thing. It's not necessarily a home lab thing, but it's a nice little side effect.
yeah. And Gonaf says, back up your NAS. Because
Yeah.
if that thing goes down, like you
Oh,
don't want to lose
absolutely.
all that data.
And that's kind of my concern with the age of the NAS. It's not necessarily that it isn't serving my needs. It's doing a great job, but when is the backplane going to die? you know, I don't know. What's the life cycle on the backplane of a Synology NAS? If that dies, it'll be very inconvenient.
Right. Well, nobody wants it where like a piece of equipment dies and nobody can watch television in the house anymore, right? Like
Right, right. Luckily, we're not quite that dependent
oof.
on it. I do have a local media server that we have like some of the kids' favorite shows on it, whatever, and some of our like DVDs that we've backed up and whatever. But it's not like we don't have any other way of watching media if that machine was down.
Yeah, Shantanu says, remember, RAID is not a backup.
Exactly.
So a funny thing about home labs and raids. So one of the things that we have in industry with raids is that oftentimes all of the devices, all the like component disk drives are from like the same manufacturer and same lot.
Hmm.
So when one of them dies, like that's a pretty good indicator that they're all going to die.
Yeah.
Whereas in home labs, often you're kind of like cobbling that together from a bunch of different places, which I think actually provides more resiliency in the home lab setup because there's more different manufacturers, different lot numbers, maybe even different sizes, which is probably not
But
great in a raid, but
on the other side, that machine may have had 5 years of hard use as an enterprise server before you put it in your home lab. So,
I mean,
there's a trade-off.
well, so now when we have NVMe drives and SSDs, hard use is not great because it lowers their life expectancy, right? But
Right.
for spinning Rust, like, I mean, you have you had the situation where you have a machine shut down and then the drive doesn't spin back up again? So,
Only a
like,
few
if you had
times.
never shut it down, it would have been fine, literally forever. But like, the motor just doesn't have enough juice to get that thing
Yeah.
going.
I
Um,
can't make it spin anymore.
so that happened to me, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, you didn't do the centrifugal force thing?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, you take the disc out and you like kind of spinning your hand like this so that you can get the platters moving, and then you slam it in the case real quick and get power to it so that the spinning that you've got from the locomotion of like spinning your hand
My
gives
gosh.
you enough that the motor was able to kick it back on." And I was like, yeah, no, I never did
Have
that
not
because
tried
I would
that.
just replace that drive.
Thanks for the suggestion though.
But he swore
We
by it. He's like, yeah, it works all the time. I'm like, oh my God,
Some
that's
of the crazy
awful.
things that you'll try when that thing was like, what do you mean the backups aren't okay? Right?
Oh, yeah.
We once had a drive fail, and this was not at my last job. This was at the little web host that I worked at, which was everything was on a shoestring budget. We had a drive fail, and we had a spare drive in the cabinet. So it's like, okay, well, we can swap in the spare drive and get the machine back up. We'll have to do some reinstall and then restore the data and whatnot. And then it's like, no, we don't have a backup. So we took the spare drive and on a complete like Hail Mary, swapped the drive controller from the spare drive to the dead drive because they were the same
Wow.
make and model. And it
Yeah.
worked. The board from the bottom of the drive, we just like swapped it and it worked.
Well,
Insane.
I was working in a place that like kept things literally until they died.
Yeah.
And when we do maintenance, we'd have to like apply updates and do a reboot. And every single time we were in that situation, I'd go, okay, what happens when it doesn't come back up? Because these, like, it could literally happen at any time. So, what are we going to do when it
Right.
doesn't come back up?
Right.
And the best was when they were just like, yeah, fortunately, we're just going to have to hope for the best. And if it doesn't come back up, we have no backup plan. We'll have to figure it out. It's like, oh my lord, no.
That's a great way to learn by fire and be a systems administration hero is really what that boils down to. I've been in those
Well,
places. That web host was one of them.
the best was it's like, yeah, we don't even know what that box does. So if it doesn't come back, we'll just have to wait to see who screams.
Yeah, exactly.
and, and it turns out it died and no one screamed. So we're like, oh, I guess it's not in use, and we decommissioned it. Woof.
Way to do it until 5 years from now, when that one process you only did every 5 years doesn't work, and you're like, "Oh,
It was that box.
that's the machine."
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we've gone a little far afield. We've gone into war stories about used hardware, which is fine. I'm sure people are enjoying it. I see lots of chat about having to tap your home lab machine with a pencil to get it up and running.
Right. Or freezing hard disk with, I'm guessing, compressed air. Oh no, putting it in the freezer. Oh, nice.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Get all those components to shrink a little bit so that you can. I guess that might actually work. It's crazy.
Things I don't want to ever have to find out.
I
For
see
500.
Shantanu accusing me of piracy up there. Thank you, Shantanu. Listen, if I showed you the box of old DVDs we have in the attic, you probably wouldn't doubt me. I'm not kidding. There are hundreds up there.
All right. So Nate, bring us back on target because we're
Yeah,
rapidly approaching our end of our time together.
right. So I was going to do whiteboard, but I guess we don't really have to at this point. The the home lab setup that I've got running, I wanted to highlight some of the other pieces. We talked a bit about um, network isolation and whatnot. But there's a few pieces that I think make my home lab a little more useful. And I think that even if you don't deploy them on day one, are good like targets for things that you may want to include someday. And again, this is going to depend very heavily on what you want to do with your home lab, what you want to learn, right? But if you're going to be kind of a systems generalist, which is where I spent a lot of my career. And I don't really know how viable that is today, if there's still systems generalists like there were then. But you're going to want to learn things like not just how do I run a server or how do I write code, but also the supporting stuff like how do I do DNS, how do I do networking, how do I do storage, right? In a big enough enterprise, there's different teams that do all those things. But in a small enough place, you may be the person that has to do all those things, right? Like that's you. And I worked at a place like that, and it was a terrible experience and a good experience all at the same time, right? So in my home lab, I have a DNS server which runs a thing called AdGuard, which is very similar to Pi-hole. If you've ever heard of Pi-hole, it not only blocks malicious ads and some other not so malicious but still annoying ads, but it also lets me do things like filter based on content. So, like I said, my kids, I have it set up so that my kids are on their own little network, their own Wi-Fi, right? And that goes through a filtered DNS where everybody else gets normal DNS, right? So certain things that I don't want them to be able to get to, I can block off. Like, say you don't want your kids on social media, you can say like, nope, I don't want them there. But that's not necessarily a home lab thing. The other benefit that it gives me is if I'm running some kind of local service that requires specialized DNS. And the thing that I've used this most for is IDM. IDM runs its own domain, kind of like Active Directory does, so that when you add a machine to it, it does like Kerberos lookups and machine specific DNS and whatnot to like authenticate and identify things. That's hard to do if you don't have your own local DNS server. So with AdGuard, I can tell it, okay, this particular subdomain, which actually doesn't exist, I actually use .lab as my local stuff. Point that over to the IDM machine for DNS requests. And so now, whether it's my workstation right here or my phone or whatever, when it tries to get to, server1.idm.lab, it gets redirected over to this local DNS. And that's really handy, right? It's really good. And you can use that for Active Directory as well. It's not just an IDM thing. There's lots of services that depend on special DNS. So that's one thing. The networking stuff I already talked about. The storage stuff we already touched on. I think that's really useful to have that as a component of your home lab. Not just because it's good to have a big place where you can store things, but also because it's a little more enterprise grade and you get that enterprise feeling from it. So it's not, if you're translating these things from your home lab to an actual workplace, it's not quite as different then at that point. So I think that's really helpful. But yeah, I think that's probably the overview I wanted to cover. I see you focused very hyper focused on chat. Anything good going on over there?
Oh no, we're just talking about ridiculousness like tape decks and other
I see.
technology that people I think have collected as collector's items, but not really Homelab items.
Johnson
Shantanu
is asking
asks,
about TLS certs.
yes.
So I don't do anything special for TLS certs. In fact, I don't think I've run into a service yet where I couldn't just make an exception to accept the weirdly unsigned certificate or a self-signed certificate. However, you could run your own local CA, right? Like you could build your own CA and make your own certs, and then you can add that as an exception or a trust to whatever it is that you're accessing them from. You could leverage IDM, I think, for that as well. If
I was going
IDM
to say
was the
that.
use case, right?
Yeah,
You
IDM
could have,
is its own CA and can issue
yeah.
certificates. And I
Then all
think
you
the
really
big
have to do
thing
is
is like,
trust the IDM, and then it won't have to be an exception. So
yeah, and that's the other key is like the browsers that you have are going to include a whole bunch of kind of well-known CAs, and you'll have to add your own CA as one of those trusted locations if you're using IDM as your certificate warehouse.
right. And you can do that at a server level as well, right? If you're like, oh, but it's not my browser I'm worried about, it's these services talking to each other. You can also accept that CA at a OS level, right? You can do that on every major operating system, as far as I'm aware. Oh man, Rick is talking about VAX and VMS with tape. Man, when I was at IBM Tech Exchange, did you know, first of all, that tape backup is still a thing? I thought this was gone. I thought nobody was doing tape backup anymore. Um, and that IBM sells this like ridiculously huge tape array that holds like terabytes per tape. It's like in the double digits, if I recall correctly. It was pretty cool to look at. It was right across from the Red Hat booth while I was standing there, and I just watched this thing moving tapes around all day. It was fun to
No, tape arrays are still a real thing because it's
complete side note there.
For your dollars per storage, it is super cheap.
Yeah,
And so, like, you know how we have on SAN and NAS arrays, there's like tiers of storage based off of its volume, but also its speed. Well,
yeah,
like tape, you get crazy volume
right.
just at really slow speeds.
Really slow speeds. That's true. That's true. But yeah, the market for tape arrays and tapes in general has really shrunk over the years. So in the back of my head, I thought it was gone, but I guess it will probably never be gone unless something equally cheap replaces it. But I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon.
Well, like we have things like drives, right? You could take drives out and warehouse them. But what ends up happening is things like, hey, Nate, when was the last time you had an IDE connector for your drive?
Right.
Right? Like the technology bits move forward, even though your data is warehoused, right? So having these large tape libraries, you're essentially keeping the same technology stack and then keeping huge amounts of data in archive. But because you're not changing the machinery, you're able to access that older information whenever you want because you can use the
Right.
machinery you have.
We had an archive project when I was at the college because we had like old books and artwork and whatever that we wanted to preserve digitally, right? And we had a guy that was like our archivist, and he put a lot of thought into stuff like, well, if we save this as a TIFF, what's the likelihood that in a century you'll still be able to read a TIFF file, right? And he would do all kinds of research around like, how that particular format works and how easy it is to convert to other formats. And it was interesting just to see like that angle of digital storage, right? Because it's stuff that we never really think about, because no matter how long lived we think our data is in IT, none of it has to survive centuries.
Right.
Right.
Right. I mean, bitmap images are still a thing. Who knew?
Right.
All right. So, not a lot of terminal this week, but
No, but you got to see
next
my
week we'll
home
be
lab again.
off. Yeah. Next week we'll be off. The week after that, we'll do more terminal. We'll figure it out. And then we'll have a couple of more weeks of tech topics, and then on the 19th Where Nate's going to be on PTO, and I'm going to bring in a special guest of who used to be my manager, and we're going to talk about manager interviews. And between her and I, like we've interviewed a lot of people. So, we talked tech interview last episode, and in 4 weeks, I think it is, we're going to talk about manager interview, right? Which is more behavioral interview questions. What questions are you going to be asked? What you should prepare for when going in to meet with that hiring manager. So, yeah, a couple weeks of tech. One more week before we wrap up for the holidays at the end of the year on surviving your manager interview. Oh, a DNS session. We can do that for sure.
We'll have to start with the haiku, though.
I mean, didn't DNS just break Amazon not too long ago? AWS?
It broke Amazon. I don't remember what the Azure one was, and everybody blamed DNS on the Cloudflare outage that happened. What was it, earlier this week? But apparently, it wasn't DNS in that case.
It was a log file.
Yeah,
too big of a log file.
Yeah, or a config file. I forget what it was. It was some sort of a features file. I thought I read.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, DNS nitty gritty. We could do that.
We could do more DNS. We've done some DNS in the past, but we haven't really gone deep.
I mean, we can go deep, Nate.
We could.
You know a guy.
We could.
By the way, I was a DNS administrator for a few years, so
I've definitely done my share of DNS over the years. I've architected DNS setups, like replications and all kinds of crazy. It's been a while, but yeah, we could talk about DNS.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do that next week, or not next week, but in 2 weeks. We'll do deeper on DNS. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Until next time, thanks for joining us. Nate, any words of wisdom as we depart?
Those of you in the U.S., have a good holiday next week.
Eat lots of turkey.
Lots of turkey. Go slay a bird and place it on the dining room table.
All right, everyone. Have a great couple of weeks without us, and we will see you in December.
Have a great one, folks.